Antietam was, well, as I've said, the bloodiest day the Western Hemisphere ever knew. In that when Lincoln fired McClellan, they damn well should have. Um, that was the right thing to do. And then you need a new commanding general. Well, there weren't any obvious choices. Um, and so Lincoln is going to choose Ambrose Burnside. And it's kind of hard to disagree with this choice. I mean, there were no good choices. Burnside had proven himself to be, if not imaginative, and if not particularly competent, he had at least been aggressive. Although he was a friend of McClellan's, he was much more aggressive than McClellan was. And if you've got the most troops, you want someone who's aggressive. And so Lincoln's decision to um, choose Burnside is perfectly defensible. Uh, People often, because of what's going to happen, people often say that Burnside's one of the worst generals um, in the um, in the American past, and some even say he's one of the worst generals in history. I don't know that I agree with that. Certainly, he's not. He's certainly not Lee. He's not Grant. He's not Longstreet. He's not Jackson. He's not Sherman. He's not any of those generals. But in his own way, uh, Burnside was both aggressive and creative, and he at when he took over in November of 1862, he outthought Lee. Um, Lee had concentrated his forces in the Shenandoah Valley and then over on the other side of the mountain, the Shenandoah Mountains in Northern Virginia. Uh, Certainly, there was no. Lee was once again behind the rivers of Virginia. You know, not really a good place to invade. Um, but Burnside decides to go around Lee, to go east and south and do it very quickly. And he does it well. He makes a kind of a fake move toward Lee's army, and while the Lee's generals are adjusting to whether or not Burnside is going to attack them head on, Burnside slips away to the east and heads south toward Richmond. Now, down in the one of the rivers you have to cross is a really broad river called the Rappahannock. If you can get across the Rappahannock, you're going to be in Richmond before Lee has a chance to get to you. Burnside did it. I mean, he got around Lee. He got past Lee. Before Lee could find out where he was, Burnside was already at the Rappahannock River at a town called Fredericksburg. He had ordered some boats, some what are called pontoon boats, boats you can make bridges out of. And he sent them, and he sent in his order properly, sent by telegraph, and somehow or another the War Department simply messed it up. And when Burnside got to the Rappahannock, there were no boats for him. There were no pontoon boats. And the end result, of course, is that he's going to be sitting there, and all of a sudden, Lee and Longstreet are going to appear in front of him. Lee, Longstreet, and Jackson. There, of all the places you can attack a fort or an army, I'm suggesting that Fredericksburg is one of the worst. Burnside, though, and I don't know if this is to his credit or not, Burnside, though, decided that his rather large army, and it was a rather large army, Burnside's large army could punch his way through. And I think Burnside had a pretty good idea that Lee had only about 70,000 men. And that he could punch his way through. He had several places where he could do it. And or where he thought he could do it. And, so I'm not really going to gripe about a general deciding to hold to plans, particularly one who is, again, Burnside's an aggressive guy. If he can get a crack in Lee's army, he's going to be in Richmond. The fact that, in retrospect, Lee and Longstreet and Jackson realized that an attack on them was a suicide mission. Burnside didn't know that. I mean, he didn't know the territory, and there was no way for him to find out because a general by the name of Barksdale, a Confederate general by the name of Barksdale, is going to fight the Union forces every inch of the way across that river. So they have no real way of scouting Lee's position. And maybe if they had been able to scout Lee's position, they would not have thrown their troops forward into Lee. Lee's troops were along a sunken road with a stone wall in front of them. You can't get a better position than that. Jackson's troops were behind a swamp, and although the swamp is going to allow some Northern troops to leak through, Jackson's going to be able to repulse them fairly easily. But nevertheless, these are reasonable decisions. What was not reasonable was that Burnside, realizing that he couldn't crack Lee's position, felt compelled to throw attack after attack after attack after attack at the same position, one which obviously could not be taken unless just by sheer luck. Longstreet's chief of artillery, when he saw the size of the Union Army, Longstreet basically said, are we going to be able to hold this? And Longstreet's chief of artillery said, when we open up, a chicken will not be able to live out there. And that's damn close to what happened. Only one brigade, the Irish Brigade, made it even close to Lee's position, and it was a slaughter. The American troops, the U.S. troops, the Northern troops, lose 13,000 soldiers basically in 6 or 7 hours. And the only troops that the Confederates lose is over on Stonewall side, where they have to throw some Union troops out of the swamp that is protecting them. And otherwise, it's a complete slaughter. And of course, it's going to lead to real troubles for Mr. Lincoln. I mean, after all this fighting, what is Lincoln to show for it except a bunch of dead troops? December 13th, the day the attack was launched, that night was very cold, and a fairly large number of wounded troops froze to death because they simply couldn't get out there and get them. It was just too dangerous. So it was a disaster. Am I going to blame Burnside? I'm going to blame Burnside for continuing to throw attacks long after it was obvious that Lee's lines could not be broken. That was a terrible mistake. And it's the opposite of McClellan, which is what Lincoln wanted and what Lincoln got. But you have to have people with a little more judgment than that. I don't think I can blame Lincoln for going for an aggressive general. And there's no way Lincoln in advance could have known that Burnside would not show judgment once it was clear that the battle was completely, utterly lost and all you were doing was slaughtering your troops. I don't have any, nobody would think that some troops, a senior general would do something like that, but that's what happened. And the end result, of course, was the disaster we know of as Fredericksburg.